This is Coingeek New York.
I'm Zach Resnick, the co-founder and managing partner of Unbounded Capital, and we're a firm that invests in scalable blockchains and the companies that use that technology to transform the world. And as a result, we're focused on the BSV ecosystem today.
Why don't we talk about if there's any particular market, tech segment, industry vertical, or blockchain technology, so to speak, like peer-to-peer payments, smart contracts, DeFi. I hear that's going to be a thing. I don't know if you guys have heard about DeFi, but it's a thing now. And NFTs. So why don't we start with Zach? Is there any particular area? Do you look at investment opportunities, segmenting them that way?
I'd say the way that we segment things at Unbounded is we really like to look at what we call Bitcoin infrastructure companies. So these are companies that allow other companies and consumers to take advantage of the incredible technology of Bitcoin without having to necessarily understand it itself. And kind of one example of that is Run, which today is the most used tokenization protocol, not just on BSV, but in kind of blockchain as a whole, at least one of the leading ones, depending on what metrics you use. And today, a game built on Run that many folks here are familiar with, built by a portfolio company of Air Ventures, Fix Gaming, today puts on some days more transactions in the entire Ethereum network through the Run protocol on the BSV Bitcoin blockchain. And that's a company where we can invest in them and not have to underwrite who's going to build the next best game, who's going to build the next great consumer product, but who's going to allow products like that to be more easily built. So that's what I'd say the majority of our investments look like today. And I don't think necessarily that strategy will be the winning one for, say, 10 years to come. But I think relatively early in using the BSV Bitcoin blockchain at scale, that strategy, I think, will probably outperform focusing on a specific sector.
In terms of BSV developments over this past year, what are your impressions of how the BSV venture ecosystem developed? Is there any particular company or trend that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think over the last year we've seen a lot of things that a lot of folks in this room were excited about in the future actually happen. So, I already spoke about Run, but I think that's definitely one of the big stories for the BSV ecosystem, given that they're on most days processing the majority of transactions on the BSV network. They're supporting a very widely used game. And I think seeing these kind of infrastructure companies that have maybe been being built for a number of years go from great products to great products in the hands of being used by people has been particularly exciting. Also another company, Handcash, we're starting to see them really take off and being used by a wide variety of game developers. And as some of the folks here that might have listened to my partner Jack Lasky speak about the new partnership between Unbounded Enterprise, built by gamers, and Haste, there's a lot of interesting things happening in the gaming world. And while I think at Unbounded Capital we're most excited about the infrastructure that allows these games to really take off and use blockchain, I think personally if there's one killer app that I would be betting on taking off as a result of leveraging BSV, it would be gaming in the near term. Yeah, I think enterprise adoption is very important, and we wouldn't be investing in BSV infrastructure if we felt this infrastructure was just for startups. We think this is the infrastructure that's going to power not just large companies, but really how our entire global financial system and internet changes over the coming years to, instead of putting effectively all of our data on private databases, putting an increasingly high amount of our data on kind of a scalable public database, which from our perspective at Unbounded, we don't see anything meaningfully competitive to the BSV blockchain. I would say that the big elephant in the room is that BSV has a lot of negative PR. And we know a lot of folks that are at large enterprises that have kind of done their technical due diligence, and that's kind of the sticking point where they're close to getting over the finish line. We have that kind of inner champion at the company. When I say we, I mean this is primarily Unbounded portfolio companies, and me and some of my partners are helping them with their sales processes. And I think overcoming that as an industry is going to allow for a lot of these infrastructure companies to be able to effectively sell to enterprises. And whenever you see large companies like built by gamers come into the space and say, hey, we're doing our own due diligence, we don't have to answer to what my boss thinks from a Google search, and we're going to evaluate what actually works and what can help the business, I think they're going to be kind of some of the first enterprises. But in terms of real large enterprises, I don't think that changes until we see just a different attitude about our space, which is changing, and kind of an anecdote around that is we've recently had a number of folks that I'd say are squarely in the crypto consensus, folks that tweet about why Solana and Ethereum and everything is great, express great interest in investing in Unbounded, but to be able to do so, they would have to do so under NDA or do it privately. So there's definitely a change from, okay, we don't even want to look at this, to, wow, this is really great, but there's some public PR issues to doing so. And then I think over the coming months, maybe the next year or two, we'll see that go from private investments to public investments, and a real change in enterprise adoption as a result.
I know Unbounded Capital has done a lot of work on this space and published a book. Do you want to kind of summarize your views on the topic?
Yeah, so our book, Green Bitcoin, How Bitcoin Can Be a Climate Change Solution, tries to cut through a lot of the misinformation around Bitcoin, and I understand why it could be confusing for a lot of investors, because the popular version of Bitcoin today is anywhere, depending on the day, either the worst or second worst in terms of the amount of carbon or energy it uses per transaction, and is an environmental disaster. There's really no other way to look at it, and if it's not the worst on a given day, Ethereum is. Well, on the other hand, kind of the original version of Bitcoin, or Bitcoin SV, is not just the most efficient transaction processing mechanism as a blockchain, but bar none, even more so than Visa or MasterCard. And today, from the research that we've done, and you could learn more about this in our book at unboundedcapital.com, it's clear that BSV is kind of on par with Visa in terms of, say, energy per transaction, maybe a little bit lower, but we're at the very early stages, and that's going to get lower and lower and lower. So I think it's fairly simple for how we kind of move forward in terms of our ESG goals in the blockchain industry, which is simply use the most efficient, scalable blockchain. And today there's really no serious competition to BSV in that regard. So I'd encourage anyone that wants to learn more about the subject to check out our book. We also have a short article that summarizes that called The Truth About Bitcoin's Environmental Impact at unboundedcapital.com.